I've spoken to Karl 3 times and he's never told that part of the story. He's too nice.
He's too nice or he's too old. He's so old he might have forgotten his ancient brain. You can't hold all that information, and it seeps out over the years.
He's completely forgotten that he said it to
This
you.
guy,
Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I'm with David Hahn. So my last interview was with Karl Kesel, the writer of Impossible Jones, and today I'm with the artist of Impossible Jones. How are you, David?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Uh, First question is, why do you love comics? Who was the spark as a fan and as an artist?
Oh, that's a good question. It's funny because I was attracted to comics initially as a kid, not so much for the art form, but because I liked comics that were of a subject matter of things I liked. Like I liked horror comics when I was little because I just liked the scary stuff. Then when I got a little bit older, I was into the Star Wars comics because I liked Star Wars. It wasn't so much that I was into comics, it was just another bit of media that had the subject matter that I wanted. In that case, when I was a kid, Star Wars. And it wasn't until I was older that I started appreciating the artwork. And that came around when I was probably a junior in high school when I started reading Heavy Metal magazine. And that's when I started realizing, oh, people draw these things and not everything looks like what we in the United States necessarily see as comics. Because heavy metal had, all kinds of European stuff. And that kind of got me turned on to the art of comics.
Who would you say your biggest influences are?
It's funny because I would have to say that the first time I started reading comics and really getting into them when I was probably about 21. So I was kind of older before I started just consuming them. And I remember seeing an issue. I mean, my biggest influences would probably be Jaime Hernandez. I think
Mm,
is deeply in the DNA of my art style and storytelling style. But I tend to really like the designy type of guys like Alex Toth, Kevin Nolan, the guys whose artwork really looks so good in black and white, because that's kind of how I started out when I first started doing comics. When I first started drawing, I just focused on the black and white stuff because that was just like the most appealing. But I remember it must have been about like 1991 or something. I was on a road trip and I was in Denver, and I remember going into like a convenience store there, 7-Eleven, and seeing like a copy of like Justice League Europe on the spinner rack back when they had those in convenience stores. And I just pulled it off and looking through it. And I was by this time as a young adult, I was, into comics, but it was an issue that was drawn by Bart Sears. And I just remember looking at it and realizing, because it just looked different. I mean, it looked like superhero comics, had all the Justice League characters and everything, but I remember it just looked a little bit different. And that's when it occurred to me that you could be a comic artist and put your own style. The artist part of the person drawing it can show through in a way that had never occurred to me before. Because I just remember just looking at his artwork and thinking, looks like superhero comics, but there's something else there. And then all of a sudden it clicked in my head. Well, I knew, of course, people draw these things and they have different styles, but it's not like, oh, if you're drawing a superhero comic, then you have to have superhero style. But that wasn't just a complete blanket term. You could still have that these were people that were artists drawing these that could make their style superhero when needed. And it
yeah.
just, for some reason, with Bart Sears' work, it really just shined through. It just spoke to me instantly. It just fired a synapse in my head. And at that point is when I started really getting into just looking at like what was the artist thinking of when they drew this? What was their approach here? Where are they borrowing from? What's the DNA of their style? And so I really was really into it for the artwork. Of course, I loved, many of the stories, but it was the visual, the artwork that really pulled me into comics.
Bart Sears has a really quirky style. and I think that was Justice League Europe.
Yeah,
And I know, jumping ahead a little bit, I know you do
yeah.
production work, concept work, for movies as well.
No, not so
No,
much. I like no for commercial stuff.
for
And
commercial
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Is that one of the differences of comics? The fact that in comics you can keep your style in the final product.
It is now. It wasn't when I first was trying to break in to make a living at it. It's like I was under the impression, and rightly so, that you had to have in American comics you had to have a superhero type of style. Those are the companies that were hiring, and at that time, you know, Jim Lee and that style was the look that was popular. And so that I tried that for a little bit for some samples, which is weird. I go back and look at those 30-year-old samples and think, wow, what it was just weird to see me being influenced by someone other than my current influences or the influences I've had for the past 25 years. So I mean, yeah, I kind of got off the rails there with what your point
Yeah.
was, but it just made me.
How'd you break into comics?
Um, I well the long short story is I met when I realized that you could make a career out of it. When I realized people actually got paid enough to live off of. The first people I ever met in comics were they were working professionally were Matt Haley and David Williams. Excuse me. I met Matt Haley in '91, and he kind of like gave me the straight dope on how comics work and how what's expected of you, and the way to get in is to reach out to editors and show samples and that kind of stuff. And that was back in the day when you'd mail the stuff in. And so I did that for a while, contacting editors and mailing samples in just to get any kind of paying work, any kind of superhero work. And I get rejection letter, rejection letter, rejection letter, rejection letter, handwritten note, keep at it, rejection letter, longer handwritten note. And that was it was frustrating, but then I realized, okay, maybe I need to do my own thing. Maybe I need to do my own style, not try to do superheroes, just try to do comics. And it was about that time I met David Williams, who kind of became my mentor. And I think there's a lot of his work or a lot of his influence in my stuff, if you know what to look for, as far as my drawings go. And he helped guide me into crafting a page and how to lead the eye from one panel to the next. I kind of had an understanding of it, but I didn't know the tricks, and I didn't, know how to stack panels properly and that kind of stuff. And this is all very, technical and esoteric. But as far as how I got in,
It's not
as
as
I said,
easy as fans think
no,
it is. No.
no, and that used to frustrate me because when I was trying to get in, I would any interview with an artist where they ask, how'd you get into comics? Like say I'm reading Comics Journal or any of the trade magazines or Wizard or something. Okay, yeah, how'd you get in? How'd you get in? How'd you get in? And inevitably be, I put some samples together and I sent them over to DC. And a couple of weeks later, the editor called me and said, "Hey, listen, we've got to fill in." And they made it sound like what, like that was it. Like it's like, no, that's
Yeah.
either that's how it worked for you because of your talent or your luck, or you're just being incredibly modest. But that's not how it normally works. So I pitched a creator-owned miniseries to Ben Dunn at Antarctic Press in the mid '90s called Private Beach, which was
This one.
basically that one started. That's the one I did with slave labor. The original one was with Antarctic Press, and that is basically I'm just using Love and Rockets as my template for my storytelling and what I wanted to do. So it's kind of aping that, and that kind of got me in. I wasn't making a living at it, but I had published work, and then from there, a few years later, I started working for. I took the Private Beach property over to Slave Labor Graphics, and kind of retooled and rebooted the character and the stories, and started just putting out quarterly issues through Slave Labor. And those comics caught the eye of Shelly Bond at at Vertigo at DC. And so, and I'd sent her some samples, and she actually had those copies of Private Beach on her desk, and she was looking for an artist for a book that Vertigo was going to publish called Bike Club with David Tishman and Howard Chaykin. And she presented Howard from, I wasn't there, but the story I heard is she presented Howard with a stack of published comic books from various artists that she thought might be a good fit, and that Howard picked Private Beach and said, I like this guy. And so
How'd
that's how I
that feel?
essentially got,
Howard
that
Chaykin.
was, yes, that was great. I was, I tried to imagine, I played that scenario over in my head, like how, I wonder where he was sitting, how it went, was it, over, like a dork, because this is my first big break, but I played that over and over in my head, trying to figure out how that happened, but it did. And he has been in my corner when I least expect it ever since. Howard will say something, they'll bring my name up in an interview or something, and I'm just totally thrilled and surprised.
You
I
would
appreciate it.
you'd work with him too, like a couple more times, right? Like you worked with him on the Escapist, and
Yeah, we did two miniseries of Bike Club,
yeah.
and then I did a short story for one of the Escapist anthologies.
Okay. Howard
Yeah.
Chaykin being the guy who brings you into the to DC is
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I mean, and I give plenty of credit to Shelly for putting my stuff in front of him, and so I was just so glad that she did that, and then he picked it, and then I would continue to do other stuff for Vertigo, Fables, and I did a Lucifer fill-in, and just stuff here and there that kept me busy.
The Lucifer fill-in is actually where I first saw your work, and
That
I
was one of
thought,
my first things. Yeah.
yeah, and I thought it was interesting because now that I look at your work in retrospect, I know that you have this tone, this style that lends itself to things like Batman 66, Impossible Jones. Um, and that's probably the most lighthearted issue of Lucifer.
Yeah, it was. That was kind of I had gotten the job for Bike Club. She had hired me for Bike Club, and she said, in the meantime, we'd still going through the script for the first couple issues. In the meantime, let's have you do this Lucifer fill-in. And that was kind of like a good way to like keep me hooked. She didn't want me going anywhere, keep me, working for Vertigo, and a way to see how we work together. And so that was my first work at Vertigo. I think I'd done at the same time or slightly before, I did one fill-in issue of Robin that Pete Woods had recommended me for. But right after that, or at that same time, is when I did the that first work for Vertigo.
Did you have, yeah, so what did it feel like, your first work for Vertigo is on one of their highest profile titles with my care?
Well, it was, I knew that I wasn't, it wasn't, Lucifer wasn't a book that I was reading regularly or anything. I knew of it, of course, and I'd, read an issue here or there, but it wasn't one that I was, wasn't in my pull list. So I was then surprised after that there's kind of sort of an assumption among a lot of readers and a lot of fans that the artist in most cases reads the title or follows the story. And in a lot of cases, especially if an artist is on a book that's a long run, well, of course they're into it, but a lot of times it's a job and you do it as well as you can. But when I did a lot of Fables fill-ins, that's a pretty, there's a huge back catalog of Fable stories by the time I got my first opportunity to work on to draw some issues in that book. And I'd meet people at conventions that would want to start talking to me about the story and the characters and such, which I can to a degree of the near the issues that I worked on, but they kind of like sometimes think that I'm going to know what's happened years later or years prior. And that sometimes that, that's something I learned with that Lucifer book, is that, okay, it is a job, but this means a lot to a lot of people. And that kind of, with that kind of attitude, it kind of made me be more conscious when I was drawing, that even if this isn't a comic book that I am reading, I want to give the people that are reading it now, everything I have, the best I can, or tell the best story, or put something in there that people are going to like, some little quirk or anything I can sneak in there, or just be faithful to capturing the characters properly and putting them on paper.
Speaking of a comic that means a lot to a lot of people, can you talk about working on Batman 66 meets the Man
That,
from Uncle?
that came out of nowhere. I just got an email, it must have been 2015, from Jim Chadwick, who was the editor on that book at the time, on the Batman 66 Man from Uncle. And he wanted to know what my availability was to work on that book. He said, I got a miniseries coming up I think you'll be a good fit for with your style. And I couldn't believe that it was a Batman book. It's like, are you kidding me? Wow. Because I know Jonathan Case, who worked on the Batman 66 books with Jeff Parker. And so to get an opportunity to draw a Batman book, not just Batman appearing in something, but 5-6 issues of a Batman book, it didn't. I was fine that it was the TV version. The TV version isn't my favorite version, but he's still Batman. I'm fine with that. I'm very familiar with the character. So when I got that email, it was one of those kind of like, yeah, I'll drop everything to work this into the schedule, and I did. But it wasn't a problem. I had a nice big opening, so it was worked out perfectly.
What is your favorite version of Batman?
I would have to. I mean, as far as a fan, okay, if we're gonna look at the film and TV, I would have to say my favorite version would be the animated series.
Mm-hmm.
Would be that's my favorite take on the character, my favorite look for the character. Of live action, I'm gonna have to stick with Michael Keaton as the 1989 Batman, just because that really hit for me.
I think people who weren't around back then have no idea how big that movie was.
Yeah, that was the superhero movie. I mean, there was Superman years before and a bunch of other little things, but that was like the one that kind of set the mold for the modern superhero movie, and it was huge. Oh my God, there was so much anticipation for that movie.
Exploded. Batmania was a real word.
Yeah. I remember Taco Bell had these full-size cutouts of the Michael Keaton Batman, like full size. And I remember going in there and I asked them, I said, when your promotion is done, can I buy this from you? Can you please put my name on the back? I will come in and pay, whatever it's worth. And they said, oh, we'll just give it to you. We throw these things out. We get so much of this stuff. And then whatever, 3 weeks later, I went back in and got it. And it took up space in my room for quite a while.
Can you talk to me about how you met Karl and how you started working with Karl Kesel?
Yes. I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico until about 1999. And my wife at the time and I had wanted to move to Portland, Oregon. She wanted to go to school there, and I wanted to go there because I knew there was a huge professional comic book community there. And I knew there was a studio there at the time. I believe it was called Studio Saurus, and it was a collection of comic artists, and one of whom was Matt Haley, who I had known in Albuquerque, who had since moved to Portland. So I thought, if I'm going to get my career going, I need to be around other people that are doing what I want to do. And so we moved to Portland, and Karl was a member of Studio Saurus at that time, and that's where we had met. And I was not a member of Studio Saurus, so I was just kind of like a peripheral person that would sort of hang out here and there. But I remember meeting Karl. The first time I met Karl was like 2 days before he was moving away from Portland. He was moving to Florida. So, hi there, bye, good to know you. And that's how I initially met him. And then when he returned to Portland a couple of years later, we all formed a studio, Mercury Studio, which became Periscope Studio, which became Helioscope Studio. And that's where I got to be reacquainted with Karl, because he's along with me, one of the founding members of that studio when we initially started.
He was moving to Florida because of CrossGen.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. CrossGen was just getting started, and that's where he was going.
Mm-hmm.
And then came back. I don't remember if it was a year or 2 years later. I'm not quite sure. But then he came back, and that's when we then became more acquainted and became peers and then friends.
That was around 18, 20 years ago.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
So how did you guys 18, 20 years later end up working together on Impossible Jones?
Well, okay, so Karl was because he was a member of the studio, but to me he was Karl Kesel. He was still he was up on a pedestal for me to a degree, because he's a person like so many other people whose name, whose stuff I would read, whose names I would see in comic books for years. That's including people, editors and other people, all involved in all aspects of comics, whose names I'd see in the masthead. And now here I am living in Portland, and I know these people. And not only do I know them, but they like me, or they're inviting me to their homes and their parties. And that was a huge deal for a guy trying to break in, was to have Karl Kesel, oh my gosh, invited us to his house for a big party. And I thought, oh, cool. So it kind of, once I got past that and realized that he and all these other people are people,
Yeah.
and it's like, hey, they kind of have the same insecurities I do about certain things. Hey, that kind of, once I met my heroes and I liked them, I had the opportunity to, well, Karl offered the opportunity. This is years ago. He had he wanted me to pencil a story for a character he'd created named Johnny Zombie, who was a character, the zombie hunter, and he wanted to do a Christmas story, just like 12 page Christmas story. And he wanted to know if I'd pencil it and he'd ink it. And to me, I couldn't believe it, because wait, you're gonna ink my pencils? I mean, this would be like, I've had professional inking jobs before, but this was like with not only someone that I knew, but someone who's immensely talented in that. And Karl can draw, and that kind of makes a huge difference. When your inker also knows how to draw, their choices are going to be a little bit more well informed. And so I penciled this short story for him, and he made it look like professional work after he inked it. And it was great. And then that was easily 12, excuse me, rubbing my eyes, 12 years ago at least. But as far as Impossible Jones that you asked about, a couple of years ago, I had gone on social media and was basically complaining about how hard it is to keep the ball rolling in this business sometimes, when you have, I was basically upset about the current state of lack of affordable healthcare coverage in the United States, and how difficult it is to try to have that when you're, not making a lot of money. And I was just going through some tough financial times. And Karl had seen that post, and he wrote me, and he said, I saw your post, and he said, I think if you're interested, I have a project that you'd be perfect for. And this isn't, he said, this isn't charity, but I see, my friend David Hahn is having difficult times, and I have this project that I've been knocking around that I'd like to do something with. This just might be the perfect time. And that was around 2017, 2018, maybe. And that's when he approached me with Impossible Jones.
I've spoken to Karl 3 times and he's never told that part of the story. He's too nice.
He's too nice or he's too old. He's so old. He might have forgotten his ancient brain. You can't hold all that information and it seeps out over the years.
He's completely forgotten that he said it to
This
you.
guy, yes, but he did. And anyone, even if they're a day older than me, I take a dig at their age. So
How do you feel about the fact that, he wanted to ink your work? This guy has inked George Perez, John Byrne, Jack Kirby, Steve Rude. Like, how'd that
well,
feel?
it's it's flattering, and it also, I mean, obviously it's flattering, but it also is one of those things that makes me feel that imposter syndrome that so many people have. But it also kind of helps me get over it too, because on one hand, I say, wait, is he just being nice? Like he wants to ink my stuff, and it's like, well, my stuff, he's inked, the best of the best. Well, okay, well then I believe in my stuff, so I guess other people can believe in my stuff. And we are always all our own worst critic. At least the decent of us people are our own worst critic. And so I was just, yeah, I was blown away. I was flattered, and I still to this day, and this is an honest feeling, when I see his inks on stuff that I turn into him. Even as recently as yesterday, I sent him a Impossible Jones cover, and he turned it back. He sent the inks back to me and Tony, our colorist, and it just looks so good. And it's like he makes he he lifts my work up, and he's a true collaborator in having a finished product. He's not just embellishing it like in the old days, where you're just making it kind of photo ready and tightening it up in the interest of saving time for the production line. He truly does make it something that it wouldn't be if it was just me trying to ink it or anybody else. And it still astonishes me. And I always joke, I said, you make me look like a professional. And that's half joking.
What about Impossible Jones? Because so I showed Impossible Jones to a friend, and one of the things that I found fascinating was when you take the name Impossible Jones as well as you take her costume, her design. The comment that I got from my friend was, "This feels like a character that's always existed." So can you talk about coming up with a design for Impossible Jones? I know she was supposed to have long hair at first.
That was, yeah. Karl has so many. I give a lot of credit to Karl because that's where it's due. He's had so many characters and ideas bouncing around in his head, some since he was a child, some that just occurred to him recently. And I remember he told me the thing about Impossible Jones is that, obviously she's got some Harley Quinn in her, but he said, really, he said, she also has some Plastic Man kind of feel. And of course, I remember Plastic Man. So when we're trying to come up with it, so he sent me a very rough sketch of what he had in mind. And I took that and I thought, okay, now what can I do to this thing? What is something that I know not only would want to draw, excuse me, but would be capable of drawing over and over and over again? It has to be a simple look, a simple costume, a simple idea. And I think that is probably why it feels like she's been around for a long time, because the design element is something that is very simple. And it also, I think it's kind of based, I think I kind of like tend to like stuff from the mid to early 1960s as far as aesthetics and look. And I think that subconsciously might be coming through. And it was, I'm sure, I think Karl turned like 75 or 80 in 1960. So he's very familiar with it. I can't help it. So I think that's what it is. I think he obviously, comics from the 60s were a huge influence on him. And that's kind of, what imprinted in his brain. And I've always loved the 60s aesthetic. And I think there's a certain timeliness to that era with certain designs. And I think that could possibly be why it seems like this character has been around, because she doesn't have, at least I hope, a design. You can look at something, you can say, oh, that's 90s.
Yeah.
Or 70s, or 80s, of course. But I think this is something that just feels like, oh, we can put her in any place. And I wanted her to look like a gymnast. I wanted her to have an outfit that looked like she was a gymnast.
And what led you guys to the yellow color scheme?
Oh, I don't exactly remember.
Because
And
it's not a common
no,
color.
no, it's not. And I know that I had done, once we kind of settled on her look, I remember I did several different color versions, different color combinations. And he might have suggested the yellow. I can't exactly remember how it came about, but I knew that we wanted white in the character, because so often you don't see, unless a character's costume is mostly white, you don't see white that often in a logo or in a character's costume, let alone, on a comic book page. A lot of colors, fill the page up with color. And like, white's a value. I love seeing, just regular old white mixed in there sometimes. So, um, that's kind of, we just kind of both kind of, he had the rough idea. He had the idea for the exclamation point, which was kind of tricky at first because, we'd think, well, we don't want it to be too much, like Madman, and we don't want it to be too much like Invincible. We got to be careful about that because that Invincible is an eye. The costume is an eye. This is basically the same thing except the other way. And then that's when I thought I'm going to make it kind of asymmetrical, because that's my Star Wars influences. Whenever you can, make something asymmetrical. So I have that the top of the exclamation point coming down a sharp angle.
A 2D animator would be mad at you for it.
Oh, and I wouldn't blame them.
Because they can't just flip it.
Right? Yeah.
And
The hair and head you can flip, everything else, but yeah, that would. Yep.
were you a fan prior to this of Harley Quinn and or Plastic Man?
Oh yeah, of Harley Quinn. Yes, Plastic Man. I just remember Plastic Man from, I think he was in some of the animated Justice Leagues. So as far as the TV version of Plastic Man is all I really was acquainted with. Harley Quinn in pretty much all versions. Starting with the animated series, and then the comics that Karl wrote, and
Yeah.
initially, I believe Terry Dodson had drawn, and then Pete Wids worked on them. Yeah, so all that.
So
Yeah,
how
definitely.
much of that love for that character you bring in here? I love how Carl is always talking about Holly Days as like she's Harley Quinn to prove
Yeah.
that that Imp isn't Harley Quinn. I'm like, aren't they
Well, that's kind
both?
of they. To me, the voice that I hear for Impossible Jones is a different. I can't picture her having that Harley Quinn type of smart alecky attitude, and I sometimes wonder, wait, is this what Karl is intending in the writing? Because when I do it, I have her, it's just a different voice for me. And then when he pointed out, he said, well, we have Holly Days so that we can say, no, she's the Harley Quinn character. Then that kind of helped a lot, because then I could put that Harley Quinn energy into the Holly Days um, drawings and pages. But yeah, Imp's or Isabel's voice is something that I haven't got my head around. I can't define it yet, but it makes sense to me when I'm drawing her.
What are the visual opportunities of drawing a character that stretches?
Um, well, I have the very weak excuse that if I don't get the anatomy correct, that, well, she's a rubbery kind of character, but then anyone could point out, yeah, but you didn't get it correct on this other normal character over here. Um, well, kind of, we haven't done this yet, but one of the things that I remember reading about when Jack Kirby created the Fantastic Four was that he created four characters that could be quickly and easily drawn. Like Human Torch, just draw a guy on fire. Invisible Girl, you just draw half of her if you're running out of time, make the rest invisible. The Thing doesn't have to look the same from panel to panel. And Mr. Fantastic, just, you don't have to draw his body, just draw his head stretching into the panel to deliver his line. And I always thought, oh yeah, we could do that with Impossible Jones. She can stretch. Sometimes we just have her head in the panel. But there has not been an opportunity to do that, nor would it seem appropriate, because it's not like I'm jammed up on time drawing this character and I have to draw her three other teammates as well. So as far as like, it's kind of fun to do things with the fingers. It's still, even though we're this far into it, I still have difficulty. I have to put serious thought into how does she shapeshift into this particular object or to camouflage herself. We're still kind of figuring some of this stuff out. And I got to tell myself, this is sort of like written in stone, but at the same time, it's not, because, every single comic book character has had some revisioning or retconning to certain
Yeah.
things. But yeah, drawing a stretchy character. Yeah, it's the hair that's mostly the stuff that I think of, like, it's my stylized version of hair, but if she existed in real life, I imagine her hair would still look like that. It'd be this weird, pointy, amorphous anemone kind of shape.
I hear you have a trick for the hair.
Yes, I'm kind of moved away from it, but for the entire I don't remember what issue it was. The hair. How'd you hear about this?
Carl told
The
me like 7 hours ago.
okay, okay. The silhouette of her hair in easily in our Holly Days and Impossible Jones comic that we just produced with our last Kickstarter. The silhouette of her hair remains the same no matter what. It's exactly the same shape, whether she's looking forward, backward, sideways, up, down, left, right, three-quarter view. The outline of her hair stays exactly the same. And so that you could take that, you can look at the comic and you can trace the hair. And if the head's roughly the same size from panel to panel, you can just see that no matter what she's doing, the outline of the hair stays the same in silhouette. And I remember I was so proud of myself coming up with that. See, that was something that a 2D animator would love.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Karl, "Did you notice about the hair? It's like the same all the time." He's all, "No, I hadn't noticed."
Right. He said he didn't notice. He was
Yeah,
inking it and he didn't notice. He was inking
yeah.
every single one differently. And he told me, and I had the PDF open and I'm looking through it and I was like, that's true. How did you know no one would notice this?
Well, I thought if someone noticed, great. If they don't, then people are going to look at it and they say, "Boy, he sure is consistent and stays on model with how he draws this character."
Regardless of the angle that her head is in, her hair is the same.
Right. Yep.
It's
For
pretty
this one,
cool.
yeah, for this, definitely for the most recent issue, the one that's coming out from our last Kickstarter. Definitely that one. Before that, her hair was kind of all over the place. And since then, on the stuff I'm working on now, I've gone back to, well, I'm just going to draw her hair however, whatever feels right at the moment. But that was just something I had to try.
One of the things that I loved about reading when I was reading Impossible Jones is that it seems like you guys already came up with a fully formed world. Like you have New Hope City, you have all of these other superheroes like Captain Lightning, Holidays, Polecat, uh, and everybody's favorite, even Steven.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that was basically, I hand most of that to Karl, because, these are, Impossible Jones was the impetus was his, he had the impetus for this character and he's had it for a while. And New Hope City and the history of New Hope City. And we got these other, our rogues gallery. And of course I certainly, contribute. And I said, well, can we have a villain named Zebro? He's just wears a zebra head and he's pretty lame. And Karl's like, of course we can. Yes, I love it. And so
That is a
whenever I see,
great impression, by the way.
oh, thank you. So yeah, so a lot of this is, Polecat, I think, is a character that Karl's has drawn since he was a child, since Karl's a kid. And so yeah, so there's a lot of, I guess it does kind of feel like this is a story that's been going on and it's already existed. It's kind of hard for me to always see that or to see what's going on, because I'm really, close to it, as far as I'm seeing this world from page to page. And it takes, 6 to 8 hours to draw a page roughly. So that's how I am experiencing the world of Impossible Jones, is 8 hours at a time in just the pencils. I get the script, I can read the script and everything, but that's how, I'm so close to it. It's hard, can't see the forest through the trees. And it wasn't until we actually got, when I got this, in the mail, when
Yeah.
when Karl said, "Here's your comps," and I got them, and I could actually sit down and read it and pretend that I was a person that had backed the Kickstarter, and this is what I got. And that's the frame of mind I put myself in. It's okay, I'm going to act like I'm a backer, and this is what I got in the mail. And to try to, I'm not looking at, look how the printing come out. Oh, how's it, see, how did Karl design the book, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to look at it as if I'd never seen it before, but had an idea. And I read it that way. And it was so much better than I remember when I was doing it, especially the writing. It's you solve the beats for what's going to happen on the page. You solve that as you're doing it, page to page to page. But to go back and be able to read that page in 30 seconds like everybody does, and you turn to the next one, to be able to read it as fast as everybody else does, as the consumer does, and watch how it fires on all its cylinders, then all of a sudden I realize, oh my God, this is the real thing. This is the real deal. This is, of course I didn't expect anything less from working with a professional like Karl, but I couldn't believe that here was one of his professional pieces of work, and I'm a part of it. I'm a co-creator. There's my name, there's my artwork, and it was, it was like reading like Superboy or Harley Quinn, except that this was something I worked on that I owned a piece of.
Isn't Karl such an underrated writer?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
When
Yeah.
people talk about the best writers, the best superhero writers, and they don't mention him, I'm like, you guys are missing something out.
Yeah.
He's so good.
Yeah.
It's this page for me that the explosion, where
Oh yeah.
with 6 insets, you guys have set the world for this. And even this character right here, who's laying down on her bed, who is going to pay off at some point. And like,
do we know who that character? I can't. Yes, and I don't want to say that character's name because I can't remember at that point if the reader would know who that character is or not. But
because you show her that she's gonna show up at some point.
She
But
has,
Karl actually told me earlier who she is.
Persephone, yeah. She's kind of
Yeah.
a mystery kind of character. So at that point, it's like, yeah, wait, who's this person that's asleep on the bed? Well, thank you very much, because I am glad to hear that, because when I drew that page, I'm just reading the script and I already know what's going to happen. I know what's happening. So I'm just like taking a workmanlike approach to drawing that page. And all I'm thinking about as I'm drawing that page is, I can't believe that Karl wants this entire city on this page. Well, guess what? He has to, if I have to draw every tiny little building in the background, that means he has to ink them. That's what I remember was going through my head. It's, oh yeah, Karl, you got to ink this little building. You got to ink this one. You got it. If I'm going to draw it, you got to ink it. I remember that was my feeling from that page. So it's really very nice to have you say that it's an impressive. I mean, I could look at it and say, yeah, it's a great page. But as far as you look at it and you're telling me about how it works as far as storytelling, to me, it's just a big flashy page. But it's like, yeah, I guess, we are setting the stage. And I'm the one who's left out of this, because Karl's probably, yeah, of course, David. What do you think this is all about?
But he did tell me that also, that when it came to the building of the world, the history of the world, there's a lot of stuff. Like, he said that you two go back and forth on the contributions. So can
Yeah.
you tell me, like, do you
Yeah.
remember specifically what you brought to the table, what he brought to the table? Or
Yeah. Well, most recently, we have some characters that Karl had a great idea for, and I'm kind of this the super stick in the mud kind of guy between us. When sometimes Karl will be excited about something, and I'll say, "Oh, that's cool, Karl, except I don't know if the tone is going to really work for this scene." I can give one example, and I don't want to feel like I'm throwing Karl under the bus, because I'm not. But we had a part where I have to draw a character that's been killed. And the way he described it in the script, it's like, okay, yeah, okay, this is, yep, that's okay, that works. Yep, that makes perfect sense. That references this, that, and the other thing. But when it came to time to draw it, and I'm sitting down, I'm sketching out my thumbnails, I'm all, oh my God, this is not going to work. Because this is going to be, you read it in a script, it's perfect for the story. But all of a sudden, drawing it, I know that this is grim and gritty, but it's just when I have to draw this character that's dead, that's an established character in the story, it's a huge tonal shift that I think was going to be jarring and not work for what we're going for, even though we are telling a very serious story. And I kind of bounced that back to him, said maybe we can do it differently, and character still gets killed and everything, but just something that doesn't look like it could be seen as exploitive or jarring in tone. So that's like one thing. Like, and he's told me on a couple occasions, David, you saved me from myself, which I take to mean like, I can sometimes spot these things that can help us craft a better project together. As far as
Is
something
that,
more specific,
is that from Imp and Holidays?
it's from Imp and Holidays. Yeah.
Okay.
Have you gotten that one yet?
So I have the PDF.
Okay.
So that's a
But
clever way to get around it, by the way. I'm not going to spoil
okay.
it for anyone, but it's a clever
Thank
way
you.
to get around not
Thank you.
showing the actual death.
Yeah. And so that's one example. And there's other things where I will push back on something. I wish I could think of an actual example. And Karl will say, well, I understand why you say that, but we really need that to happen here because this other thing's going to happen here. And so, okay, well, then that makes sense. But he's always been very good that if I feel strongly about something, and I only speak up if I feel strongly about something.
There's a 2-page silent sequence in Imp and Holidays that he told me about that you insisted on putting in. And coincidentally, as he was talking about it, I had those 2 exact pages up on my computer. Because
Oh, well, which ones?
it's the one by the end, or I guess it's a 1-page sequence. It's the one by the end when she visits the victim's house.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was I don't want to talk in code, but that was just a situation where, yeah, I thought we needed to get to know. I didn't want this character's death to be just a plot device. So we got to do something that brings it home a little bit more as far as this was a person.
And I had it up because the last panel on that page where Impossible Jones very remorsefully says us imps have to stick together.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was telling him, and I'll tell you now, that is an amazing facial expression. And I think you are so good at facial expressions because they're so subtle. And what he said was, yes, when he's inking you, he's got to be really careful because a smile can easily turn into a smirk if he makes a mistake. Like,
yeah, it's funny. Yeah, well, I guess you did just talk to him because we were talking about this yesterday, that he said, because my stuff is so clean that it's harder to, that you don't get your choice of sketchy lines to choose from. You got to make it right. And I told him that I've had people tell me in the past that my style is so clean that it gives an inker no place to hide, which would be the exact thing about you got to be careful because a smile can be a smirk, which is why I trust he's always made the best. He always makes the best choices and the best decisions. I've never been disappointed. I'm somebody who like say, this page isn't as good as I would have liked because I was trying out some new brushes and they take some breaking in. I'm just not satisfied, but we don't have time to do it all over again. And the page looks fine to me. It's like, well, if you're disappointed, your disappointment is better than most people's best.
that's the thing with your work. The way you do faces is it's so animated, so it really carries so much of the story. And that is evident in the graphic novel with everyone in it. It's evident in Imp and Holly. And what is the new Captain Lightning book like for you? I mean, you are drawing a character that Karl created in the second grade.
Yeah. Well, we've never gotten any meat to his story. He just kind of shows up and he's gone. So far that's all it's been. I don't want to give anything away, although he does have a humorous little moment that kind of like I think disarmed me and will probably disarm the reader a little bit. But he's fun to draw because now I'm starting to get a handle on him, whereas he only made a couple appearances in the first book. I'm starting to get a hang of what I want this guy to look like.
And he has that super retro costume too. That's
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. He kind of reminds me of a Captain Atom from the Justice League a little bit in his look, even though he's not metallic or anything. But
can you tell me how you came up with the lightning bolt on his chest with the lightning logo? Because there's a lot of characters in comics with lightning on their chests. And how did you come up with someone who is how would you come up with a logo
I
that is distinct?
I think that Carl came up with that. I think that he probably said something along the lines of what you just said in his notes and sent me a rough sketch. And our first thought was, okay, we have to make this not look like Nexus, the Nexus logo for Nexus, because he has like an offset lightning bolt as well. I think, okay, well, how are we gonna do this? Well, I guess really the trick is to just make it similar but not the same, but make his outfit kind of look different enough.
Yeah.
But I kind of tend to fall into the design idea of kind of making everyone look like the 1970s Green Lantern or early 1980s Green Lantern, as far as the men's like a jumpsuit kind of thing with angles in it. I kind of tend to do that, and I think that Polecat and um, uh, Captain Lightning's costumes are so similar to that way that I dare not do it again on any other character designs.
Do you have a favorite character so far in the book?
Well, other than Impossible Jones, Holidays is the most fun to draw. Um, but as far as like, if I had to pick a character, even Steven is such a weirdo that I like his stories. I like to me, he seems like he'd be the character that I don't want, that Carl would have to think the hardest about in how to write because of, or maybe he's the easiest because of how even Steven's very simple in how he views the world, that everything must be even. Therefore, it can be proven that good will always triumph over evil.
In a fair
Yeah.
fight.
In a fair fight, all things being equal, good will triumph. But to me, it was like, he's got to be a kind of a hard guy to write, but he's always been one of my favorite guys to draw because, again, I can make him weird. I can make him standing at an odd angle, at a funky angle, or have him just doing something weird or hovering above the floor a little bit, and we don't have to explain it. It's like the reader just accepts. Yeah, there's something going on with this guy. We don't know what it is.
I love that you guys don't spell out stuff because there's a sequence in Imp and Holly where, Imp is in the police precinct and she's swinging around trying to escape the police. And on the ground is a blonde reporter. And later on, you find out Holly was there at the police precinct. And you'd
Yeah,
never spell it out, but it's pretty clear that that one reporter is Holly Days.
good. Thank you, because because Carl and I like doing that kind of thing of like, let's have it so that the person, they read the story and they go, wait a minute. Then if they flip back, there it was. It wasn't just a happy accident that there happened to be a character that looked similar that someone could say, well, someone could fan speculate, well, that was Holly Days in the reporter costume. But no, we deliberately did it that way because we love the idea of people being able to flip back to see, wait a minute, this guy's referencing this, a previous event, and you go back and look and it's exactly as presented.
And you
So
don't
thank
have
you.
Imp say anything like, oh, yeah, Holly was there either, because she wouldn't have noticed.
Right. Yeah, we take the approach that we want to presume that our readers are not only smart but smarter than us. That's how I've always liked it. I love watching TV and movie where I have to keep up. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
you never want the audience to be ahead of the story, but I want to like have stuff be said, and I just got to know that techno babble means something, means what it means. I don't have to have it explained to me.
Yeah, and in the graphic novel, one of the key settings is a gym called Copper's Gym, and then one of the first things you find out in Imp and Holly is that Copper used to be a 50 superhero, right?
Right.
If you end up, if you don't connect those two, nothing changes. You still enjoy the story. But if you do connect those two, it's like, hey,
Yeah,
that's pretty
but
cool.
I'm glad it's so funny because it's a subtle connection in the comic, but when Karl sends me the emails, he spells it out for me. He said, it says Copper's Gym because see what we're doing there? Referencing back. See what we did? It's like, okay, yeah, great, Karl. And I don't mean that sarcastically because sometimes I do need stuff spelled out for me. It's like, oh yeah, I love it.
Does it make it easier? Like at this point, do you guys have a map of New Hope City or where everybody lives or?
A rough one. I created a map back when we were doing our world building, and we have a rough idea of like where downtown is, where the river is, where the waterfront is, where the rough neighborhoods are, kind of stuff. But nothing that we're gonna adhere to too terribly because you don't want to get boxed in when it comes to panel per panel. But yeah, we have a rough layout. So whenever someone's looking at downtown, we know what part of the city that they're at.
What is your favorite moment so far in the ones that you've written, that you've drawn?
I would have to say, I think gosh, we hit a lot of beats that I like. I guess a beat is a moment, but I'm gonna have to say, as far as the story goes, I really like the story we did that was the Christmas special with it appears in the back of the book where um, the stop motion animation dolls for a holiday special were being stolen, and there's a part at the end where Holly gives back to Imp the doll of the one character that she really liked and leaves it for
Yeah.
her in the snow. And for some reason, I really like those moments, and I did it with the with what we spoke about earlier about the character that was Holly's or Imp sneaks into the apartment of this deceased character. I like a character walking around thinking and looking at things, but no word balloons. I did that a lot in a book I created called All Nighter that came out 15 years ago, where I would have the central character who would rob houses. And in several scenes where she'd just be in the house looking at the personal items and thinking about the people who live in that house that she's robbing, but without any spelling out of what's going on in her head. I just leave her actions and her facial expressions up to it. And I like those moments in Impossible Jones.
And that Christmas special too, right? Like as a guy who was a big fan of the Batman animated series, how did it feel using Paul Dini's character Jingle Bell?
That was fun. That was fun. It was fun to draw them as these little characters.
Is that cool?
Yeah, Jing. Yeah.
What can we look forward to in future in the rest of Imp #2? So the next one will have Polecat. Well, the next one will have Captain Lightning, followed by Polecat, followed by an all new character right here.
Um, I don't know. I don't know. Honestly, I mean, we have some, and I'm not saying I end up being coy. Um, I get the scripts and I get the plots, but I don't have Karl's the big picture guy, and I have
Okay.
all my faith in him. We're gonna see, the characters we saw in the first one obviously are making reappearances that are fleshed out more like Captain Lightning and Holidays and such. But we do have a new crime group based on circus sideshow people that make their first appearance in our next book, and they were a lot of fun to draw. I had to learn how to draw tigers.
I know that you put in a lot of references here because the first people that Imp ever fights in the graphic novel, they look like human versions of the Beagle Boys.
Yes, and I don't know what I'm doing because I don't know all the history and lore, and I turn those pages in, Karl's all, oh, it's the Beagle Boys. And then what? And then I looked up and said, oh, okay, I get it. So that's just like stuff that's in the zeitgeist that's like seeps into, my influences. Or that kind of look is just a good look for goofy,
Yeah.
goofy thieves,
Yeah.
sidekick thieves.
red sweater,
Yeah.
jeans. For my last question, I'll throw you a softball because I know you'll like to take cracks at anyone who's older than you. So I told Karl earlier that the book feels retro to me, and I grew up in the 80s, 90s.
Mhm.
And he says he's trying to make a book that's retro to him, like, and he grew up before the 80s, 90s.
Right.
Right. So I find that fascinating because obviously what's retro to me isn't what's retro to him. Okay.
Right.
But it also feels modern to me because it feels like a new comic book set in the modern day, set in 2021 with a diverse cast, and the sensibility, the sense of humor is still very 2020, 2021. And he says that pretty much any modernity in the book is because of you. How do you feel about that?
This is your softball question.
It's
um, well,
my softball question in case you want to take a crack at him.
well, gosh, now I feel bad because he's not that much older than me. I don't see how is the modern stuff me? Because I tend to feel like the guy that, I mean, okay, I'll take that as a compliment to answer the question, but I feel like the guy that that is stuck in 1990 or 1989 with my taste in clothes or my taste in music or how I think cool kids would look in my comic. I'm the one that I feel like I'm stuck in that, and I have to be more aware of what's going on. Although I will say there were many times when Karl would write something where so and so walks into the room and they're reading the newspaper and they throw the newspaper down. They say, "Guess what? Blah blah blah." And I said, "Karl, let's, instead of a newspaper, let's make that like their phone or a tablet or something, because that's really, no one's going to be reading the newspaper. People read the newspaper, but let's have her like pull up this, instead of showing a newspaper, have her just hold up her phone and say, look at this, because that's really what would be happening." And I think that maybe that's what he means by helping him stay modern.
Yeah, he says you drag him into the 21st century.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad, because um, it's his roots in the cool older stuff that really is stuff that I'm more, that is, what am I trying to say? That stuff has very strong foundations, and he is well experienced in telling those kind of stories, because I'm not really a writer or a storyteller, and so he knows what he's doing.
It's so great. This comic has been so great.
Thank you.
I'll add one last question, and I asked
Okay.
him the same question. So you're part of Helioscope,
Right.
and also part of Helioscope are a couple named Paul Tobin and Colleen Coover,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a comic called Bandette, which is also
Yes.
about a thief whose best friend slash frenemy is also a thief. Did you guys ever talk about this?
No.
Okay.
No, and I have not. No, this is not. This has not come. I have, since we created Impossible Jones, I have not been in the studio in the company of all my friends there. Um, but they know how to, we're social media friends and stuff. So I would
Yeah.
think that maybe, no, that had never even occurred to me till just now.
Yeah. I don't
But
it only occurred to me in like the last week because it's only the most superficial of similarities, right? They're two
right.
completely different books. They're not even the same size.
Yeah. See, not even the same size.
They're not even the same size. They look more like a European BD type book. This is a straight up superhero book.
Mhm.
And so, but I thought like if you put it in the most bare type of description, I'm like, oh wait, that's kind of funny.
Yeah. I guess there's only so many good ideas out there, but I guess it speaks nicely that the people that had the same good idea are our friends and share our studio.
Thank you,
They
Mr.
had it first. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was such a great interview. Maybe we can do it again at some point.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Thank you so much.